The brain is most open and impressionable in the first moments after waking. Yet, this window is ignored by most people. When you wake up, your mind has not fully reattached itself to yesterday's worries, identities, and emotional patterns. It is in a soft, unguarded state, similar to fresh clay before it hardens. Whatever you introduce into this state becomes a foundation. If the first thing you do is panic, rush, or consume noise, the brain quickly locks into survival mode. But if the first moments are calm and intentional, the brain begins the day organized instead of reactive. Neuroscience shows that during this early period, the boundary between the conscious and subconscious mind is thinner. This means beliefs, attitudes, and emotional tones pass through more easily. That is why mornings often decide the emotional direction of the entire day. A rushed morning trains the brain to expect pressure. A chaotic morning teaches the brain to stay alert for threats. Over time, these patterns harden into personality traits, not because they are true, but because they are repeated. When you wake up and immediately reach for your phone, the brain learns that external stimulation is more important than internal awareness. Notifications become commands. The mind becomes trained to react before it can choose. This weakens self-control and strengthens anxiety loops. Each morning this happens, the brain reinforces the belief that peace is unavailable unless the outside world approves or entertains you. In contrast, when you delay stimulation, even for a few minutes, the brain learns patience. Sitting up slowly, breathing deeply, and allowing thoughts to pass without engagement teaches the mind that it does not need to chase every impulse. This retrains the nervous system from urgency to stability. Over time, the brain becomes less triggered because it no longer expects chaos at the start of the day. The thoughts you entertain in the morning quietly define your self-image. If your first thoughts are complaints, regrets, or fear, the brain accepts these as identity signals. It begins to search for evidence to support them throughout the day. But when your first thoughts are neutral or grounded, the brain stays open instead of defensive. It becomes observant rather than judgmental. Many people try to reprogram their thinking through motivation later in the day, but by then the brain is already exhausted and reinforced by repetition. Morning patterns bypass resistance. They work because the mind has not yet built its walls. This is why small morning rituals are more powerful than dramatic evening promises. Even posture matters in the morning. How you sit up, how you breathe, how you move sends information to the brain about confidence and readiness. A collapsed posture trains helplessness. A steady posture trains self-trust. The brain does not argue with repetition, it obeys it. When mornings are treated with intention, the brain stops being a battlefield. It becomes a training ground. Instead of fighting negative thoughts all day, you prevent them from forming their momentum. This is not force. This is alignment. The brain learns through exposure, not effort. The first moments after waking are not about achievement. They are about orientation. You are teaching your brain what kind of day this will be, what kind of person you are being today, what kind of world you are stepping into. When you consistently choose calm over chaos in these moments, the brain slowly rewires itself to expect clarity instead of stress, presence instead of panic, direction instead of drift silence, and stillness are not empty spaces. They are environments where the mind regains its authority. In a world that constantly demands attention, the brain becomes conditioned to noise. Sounds, opinions, notifications, and conversations begin to dictate inner direction. Over time, the mind forgets how to remain centered without external input. Silence in the morning interrupts this conditioning and reminds the brain that it can exist without being stimulated or directed from the outside. When the body is still and the environment is quiet, the brain naturally slows its pace. Thoughts begin to rise, but without the pressure to respond to them. This is where authority is rebuilt. Authority is not control through force, it is clarity through awareness. The brain starts to notice patterns instead of being trapped inside them. A thought appears, and instead of becoming a command, it becomes an observation. This single shift changes how the mind relates to emotion, fear, and desire. Stillness exposes mental habits that are usually hidden by activity. When everything stops, impatience surfaces. Restlessness becomes visible. The urge to move, check, speak, or distract reveals how dependent the brain has become on stimulation. This discomfort is not a problem, it is feedback. The brain is showing you its conditioning. By staying still instead of escaping, you teach the nervous system that discomfort does not require action. In silence, the brain begins to regulate itself. Breathing deepens naturally. Heart rate slows. The body exits survival mode. When this state is practiced daily, the brain rewires its baseline. Calm stops being an occasional experience and starts becoming a default setting. This directly affects decision-making, emotional responses, and perception throughout the day. Silence also weakens the dominance of internal noise. Many people believe their thoughts are who they are because they never experience space between thoughts. Stillness creates that space. When thoughts slow down, the brain realizes it does not need to follow every narrative it produces. This realization reduces identification with fear-based thinking. The mind stops acting as a dictator and starts functioning as a tool. Morning silence is especially powerful because the mind has not yet absorbed the world's expectations. There is no performance required, no roles to play, no identities to defend. In this state, awareness is clean. The brain is not reacting to memory or anticipation, it is simply present. This presence sharpens perception and strengthens inner direction. Stillness trains patience at a neurological level. By remaining unmoving, you teach the brain that it can survive without constant novelty. This increases emotional endurance. Situations that once triggered irritation or anxiety lose their intensity because the brain has learned to sit with sensation instead of escaping it. Authority grows when the brain no longer seeks permission from the outside to feel complete. Silence removes comparison, validation, and pressure. It brings the mind back to its own center. From this center, choices become intentional instead of habitual. Reactions slow down, responses become measured. Over time, silence rewires the brain's relationship with power. Power stops being loud, forceful, or reactive. It becomes quiet, steady, and grounded. A mind that can sit in stillness without discomfort cannot be easily shaken by chaos, criticism, or uncertainty. This is not withdrawal from life, it is preparation to engage with life without losing balance. When silence and stillness are practiced consistently, the brain learns that peace is not something to chase, but something to return to within itself. Small discipline in the morning reshapes the brain more deeply than dramatic effort later in the day because it works with the mind instead of against it. The brain responds to consistency, not intensity. When you choose a simple disciplined action right after waking, you send a clear signal that direction comes before desire. This signal, repeated daily, slowly reorganizes how the brain prioritizes comfort, effort, and control. Discipline does not begin with force. It begins with agreement. When you make a small commitment in the morning and keep it, the brain records evidence of reliability. This builds self-trust at a neurological level. The mind starts to believe that instructions will be followed, not negotiated. Over time, this reduces internal resistance because the brain no longer expects inconsistency from itself. Many people associate discipline with punishment or restriction, which creates inner conflict. Morning discipline, when kept small, avoids this conflict. It might be making the bed carefully, drinking water before anything else, or sitting upright for a few minutes. These actions are not impressive, but they are powerful because they are completed before excuses gain momentum. The brain learns that action does not require motivation. Each small act of discipline strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and impulse control. When this area is activated early, it remains more active throughout the day. This is why people who start their mornings with order often experience fewer emotional spikes and better focus later. The brain carries the tone of the first actions forward. Discipline also trains the brain to tolerate delay. When you choose effort over ease in the morning, the mind learns that discomfort is temporary and manageable. This reduces avoidance behaviors. Tasks that once felt heavy become lighter because the brain has practiced stepping into mild resistance without panic. Your inner strength is built quietly. The brain does not grow stronger from grand declarations, but from repeated follow-through. Each time you complete a small disciplined act, the brain releases subtle reinforcement chemicals that associate effort with stability rather than stress. Over time, this rewiring changes how the brain interprets challenge. What once felt threatening starts to feel familiar. Morning discipline also reduces decision fatigue. When certain actions are non-negotiable, the brain conserves energy. It no longer debates whether to act. This clarity frees mental space for creativity, problem-solving, and awareness. The mind becomes less scattered because it is not constantly bargaining with itself. There is also an identity shift that occurs. The brain begins to register you as someone who acts deliberately. This identity is not built through affirmations, but through behavior. When behavior is consistent, the brain adjusts self-image to match it. Confidence grows not from success, but from alignment between intention and action. As discipline strengthens, emotional regulation improves. The brain becomes less reactive because it is used to choosing response over impulse. This does not make a person rigid, it makes them grounded. Flexibility actually increases because the brain is no longer controlled by immediate cravings or emotional swings. Small discipline in the morning sets a baseline of order. Even if the rest of the day becomes unpredictable, the brain remembers that it began with structure. This memory creates stability under pressure. Stress does not disappear, but it no longer dominates. Over time, inner strength stops feeling like effort. It becomes a natural state. The brain no longer asks whether it should do what is necessary, it simply does it. This is how small disciplined actions, repeated quietly, rewire the brain for resilience, self-respect, and calm power without noise or force. What the mind consumes in the early hours quietly programs the direction of thought for the entire day. The brain does not process information in isolation. It absorbs tone, emotion, and rhythm along with content. When the first inputs are chaotic, negative, or sensational, the brain shifts into a defensive and scattered state. It begins to scan for problems, conflicts, and threats, not because they are present, but because it has been trained to expect them. Morning consumption shapes perception. Words, images, and sounds act as instructions. If the brain is fed urgency, it creates urgency. If it is fed fear, it sharpens fear. Many people believe they are reacting to life, when in reality, they are reacting to what they consumed hours earlier. The brain simply follows the pattern it was given. Clean input is not about positivity or denial. It is about clarity. When the brain is exposed to simple, grounded information in the morning, it stays organized. It does not fragment its attention. It does not chase stimulation. Instead, it moves with intention. This reduces mental fatigue and emotional reactivity throughout the day. Noise in the morning weakens focus. Scrolling through random content trains the brain to jump rapidly between ideas. This creates shallow thinking and restlessness. Over time, the brain loses its ability to stay with one thought long enough to understand it deeply. This is why many people feel busy but unfocused. Their minds are full, but their awareness is thin. When you choose what enters your mind early, you reclaim authority. Even a few minutes of reading, reflection, or listening to steady language teaches the brain to move at a slower, more deliberate pace. This pace allows thoughts to connect instead of collide. The mind becomes less reactive and more coherent. Emotional content has a stronger impact in the morning because the brain has not yet built emotional defenses. Dramatic news, arguments, or comparison-based content imprint deeply. These imprints influence mood, confidence, and behavior long after the content is forgotten. The brain remembers the feeling even when it forgets the source. Clean input also strengthens self-awareness. When the brain is not overwhelmed, it can notice internal signals. Hunger, tension, excitement, and intuition become clearer. This improves decision-making because choices are made from awareness instead of impulse. What you repeatedly consume becomes familiar, and familiarity becomes comfort. If chaos is familiar, peace feels uncomfortable. This is why many people feel uneasy in silence. Their brains have been trained to equate stimulation with safety. By choosing clean input in the morning, you slowly reverse this conditioning. Calm begins to feel normal. The quality of thought determines the quality of action. A mind filled with noise struggles to act with precision. A mind fed with clarity moves with confidence. Clean input is not about controlling the world, it is about controlling what shapes your internal environment. Morning consumption also affects self-talk. The brain mirrors the language it hears. Harsh, critical content increases self-criticism. Balanced language encourages balanced thinking. Over time, the tone of inner dialogue shifts to match the tone of early input. This practice is subtle but powerful. You may not notice immediate changes, but the brain is always learning. Each morning, it takes notes. It observes what you allow and what you refuse. From these observations, it builds patterns. When you protect the mind in the early hours, you reduce the need for recovery later. Less damage means less repair. The brain stays clearer, calmer, and more directed, not because life is easier, but because the internal environment is no longer polluted by unnecessary noise. Focused presence is a skill the brain must relearn after years of distraction. Modern life trains the mind to split attention, jump between tasks, and seek constant stimulation. Over time, this fragments awareness and weakens the brain's ability to stay with one experience fully. When presence is lost, effort increases. People try harder but achieve less because the mind is never completely engaged. The brain becomes powerful not through speed but through depth. When attention is concentrated on a single action, neural pathways strengthen more efficiently. This is why a few minutes of deep focus can produce more clarity than hours of scattered effort. Presence organizes mental energy. Instead of leaking in multiple directions, it moves with precision. Most exhaustion is not physical, it is mental leakage. When the brain constantly shifts focus, it spends energy restarting tasks rather than completing them. This creates the feeling of being busy but unproductive. Focused presence eliminates this waste. The brain settles, and in that settling, strength emerges. Presence also changes the relationship with time. When attention is divided, time feels rushed. When attention is whole, time feels spacious. This does not slow productivity, it improves it. The brain no longer feels chased by deadlines because it is anchored in the current action. Emotionally, presence stabilizes the mind. Anxiety thrives on future projection. Regret feeds on past replay. When the brain is trained to stay with what is happening now, these loops weaken. The mind stops borrowing stress from imagined outcomes. Emotional reactions soften because they are no longer fueled by mental narratives. Focused presence also sharpens perception. Small details become visible. Tone, timing, and subtle signals are noticed. This increases intelligence without effort. The brain becomes more responsive and less reactive. Decisions improve because they are based on observation rather than assumption. Training presence does not require long sessions. It begins with ordinary actions done completely. Drinking water without distraction, walking without planning, listening without preparing a reply. These simple practices teach the brain to stay. Each time you resist the urge to multitask, you strengthen neural circuits related to attention control. The brain initially resists presence because distraction has become comfortable. Restlessness appears. The urge to check, move, or escape arises. This resistance is a sign of conditioning, not failure. By staying anyway, the brain learns that stillness and focus are safe. Over time, presence reduces the need for excessive effort. When attention is clear, action becomes efficient. The mind stops forcing results and starts aligning with the task. This reduces burnout and increases satisfaction. Fun-fized presence also affects self-respect. When you give full attention to what you are doing, you communicate value to yourself. The brain registers this as dignity. This quietly shifts identity. You no longer feel scattered or rushed. You feel composed. Relationships improve as well. Presence allows genuine listening. Without internal distraction, connection deepens naturally. The brain releases tension when it feels fully engaged rather than divided. A present mind is difficult to manipulate. It does not react immediately to provocation. It pauses, observes, and chooses. This creates inner power without aggression. Over time, the brain learns that focus is not strain, it is ease. Effort decreases as presence increases. You stop pushing through life and start moving with it. This is why focused presence becomes more powerful than constant effort. It aligns the mind instead of exhausting it, allowing clarity, strength, and effectiveness to emerge naturally from attention itself. Detachment from outcomes is not indifference. It is a refined form of mental strength. The brain naturally seeks control, and control is often mistaken for safety. From an early age, the mind learns to attach its sense of worth to results, approval, and visible success. Over time, this attachment conditions the nervous system to treat uncertainty as a threat. Detachment retrains the brain to stay steady even when results are unknown. When the brain is attached to outcomes, it constantly projects into the future. It rehearses success or failure before either occurs. This creates tension because the mind is living in a reality that does not yet exist. Stress is not caused by effort, but by expectation. Detachment removes this added weight. The brain returns to the present task instead of the imagined result. Attachment narrows perception. When the mind is fixated on a specific outcome, it ignores alternative paths and signals. Creativity decreases, flexibility weakens. The brain becomes rigid because it is trying to force reality to match a mental image. Detachment opens perception. When the mind releases insistence, it sees more clearly and adapts more easily. Emotionally, attachment amplifies reactions. Success brings temporary relief, while failure feels personal. The brain equates outcomes with identity. Detachment dissolves this equation. Results become feedback rather than verdicts. This reduces emotional volatility and builds resilience. Practicing detachment does not reduce motivation. It purifies it. Action becomes driven by alignment instead of fear. The brain learns to act fully without clinging to reward. This creates a steady flow of energy that is not dependent on praise or recognition. When outcomes are released, the nervous system relaxes. The body no longer braces for judgment. This relaxation improves performance. Muscles move more freely, thoughts flow more smoothly. The brain functions better because it is not under self-imposed pressure. Detachment also changes how the brain processes failure. Instead of triggering shame or avoidance, mistakes are integrated as information. Learning accelerates because the mind is open rather than defensive. The brain stops protecting an image and starts refining skill. Many people believe detachment means lowering standards. In reality, it strengthens consistency. When emotions are not tied to results, effort becomes sustainable. The brain no longer burns energy on anxiety spikes. It invests that energy into precision and presence. Attachment creates fear of loss. Detachment creates stability. When the mind no longer fears losing a specific outcome, it becomes harder to manipulate through pressure or comparison. Inner peace increases because worth is no longer outsourced. This practice also affects relationships. When expectations are released, connection becomes cleaner. The brain stops demanding validation and starts offering presence. This reduces conflict and increases trust. Over time, detachment rewires how the brain defines success. Success becomes effort with integrity rather than outcome with applause. This shift brings quiet confidence. The mind no longer needs constant reassurance because it is grounded in process. Letting go of outcomes does not mean passivity. It means engaging fully while remaining internally free. The brain learns that it can give its best without clinging. This freedom creates clarity. Decisions become less emotional and more precise. As detachment deepens, anxiety loses its grip. The future no longer dominates attention. The present becomes sufficient. The brain settles into a rhythm where action and acceptance coexist. In this state, peace is not dependent on results, and effort flows without resistance, allowing life to unfold without inner struggle or fear of what comes next. In the end, rewiring the brain is not about forcing change or becoming someone else overnight. It is about understanding how the mind learns and gently guiding it in a new direction, one morning at a time. Every habit discussed is small, simple, and quiet, yet together they reshape the internal environment where thoughts, emotions, and decisions are formed. When mornings are approached with awareness, the brain stops reacting to life and starts responding to it. Silence restores authority. Discipline builds trust within the self. Clean input protects clarity. Focused presence gathers scattered energy. Detachment from outcomes dissolves fear. None of these practices demand perfection. They require consistency. The brain is always listening. It listens to how you wake up, how you breathe, how you choose, and how you respond when no one is watching. Over time, it adapts to what you repeatedly show it. Stress fades not because life becomes easier, but because the mind becomes steadier. This is how real change happens, not through motivation, but through alignment, not through control, but through awareness. When you commit to shaping your mornings, you are not just changing habits, you are changing identity. And as the mind changes, behavior follows, perception sharpens, and life begins to move with less resistance and more clarity.